Victoria has always liked living in places with stories. The house where she lived now was no exception, an old building, built at the end of the 19th century, with wooden floors that creaked with every step and large windows that allowed moonlight to invade the rooms in an almost supernatural way. Victoria, a young woman of 30, had moved to this house looking for a peaceful refuge, away from the urban chaos that bothered her so much. She was a practical, down-to-earth person and never paid much attention to ghost stories or unexplained phenomena. Her only companion was Nina, an adorable dog of undefined breed, who Victoria had adopted from a shelter. Nina was special. She had an expressive, almost human look and a caring demeanor that won over everyone around her. However, there was something peculiar about Nina that Victoria took a while to notice. Nina had a strange habit. At night, she used to scratch Victoria's bedroom door, as if she wanted to warn her about something. Victoria thought it was just a silly habit, perhaps some remnant of the difficult times at the shelter. Victoria led a peaceful life, dividing her days between remote work as a book editor and long walks with Nina around the picturesque surroundings of her new home. The nights, however, began to become restless. Little by little, Victoria began to notice that Nina seemed more agitated. The scratching on the door became more frequent and intense, and Nina seemed to always be on alert, observing something invisible to Victoria. Victoria, trying to remain calm and rational, decided to investigate the origin of Nina's behavior. She began to look for anything that could be disturbing her faithful friend. Maybe a mouse in the attic, she thought, or some other animal that might be invading the house during the night. But nothing explained the low barks and the attentive looks that Nina cast into space. On one of these nights, while unsuccessfully trying to calm Nina down, Victoria found herself enveloped in a sepulchral silence, broken only by the insistent sound of Nina's nails scratching the wood. It was as if time itself had stopped. It was then that a succession of inexplicable events began to happen, shaking his skeptical view of the world and revealing dark secrets about the true history of that house and its former inhabitants. And that was how Victoria, little by little, realized that her new home held mysteries beyond her understanding, mysteries that only began to unfold before her eyes with Nina's help. Something was about to be revealed, something that would forever change Victoria's perception of the world around her. The house where Victoria and Nina lived was a true testimony of time, a building that exuded history in every corner. Located on a quiet street, surrounded by ancient trees, the house had an imposing facade, with a large wooden portico that had been repainted countless times over the decades. Its windows were tall and narrow, adorned with delicate stained glass that reflected sunlight in soft colors during the day and created mysterious shadows at night. Inside, the house maintained its old essence. The wooden floors, despite being worn, still retained a certain shine and emitted characteristic sounds with each step, as if whispering secrets from times gone by. The entrance hall was spacious, with a large crystal chandelier hanging from the high ceiling, swaying slightly with each passing draft of air. The walls were covered in faded wallpaper, in shades of green and gold, with floral patterns that recalled a time of elegance and refinement. The living room was dominated by a marble fireplace, which was rarely used but still emanated a feeling of warmth and comfort. On the surrounding shelves, old books and dusty decorative objects told stories of generations past. A large golden mirror, with its surface slightly stained by time, reflected the image of the room in a distorted way, creating an almost ghostly effect. The kitchen, although modernized, maintained its original rustic charm. Dark wood cabinets, granite countertops, and an antique dining table, worn from use, formed the heart of the home. It was there that Victoria spent much of her time, cooking and observing Nina, who often seemed distracted, fixing her gaze on specific points in the environment, as if she were following something or someone invisible. The rooms upstairs were equally charming and mysterious. Victoria's room was a personal sanctuary, decorated with antique furniture that she had scavenged from flea markets and antique stores. A large four-poster bed, with heavy velvet curtains, occupied the center of the room, offering a feeling of security in isolation. On colder nights, Victoria liked to curl up in the covers and read by the light of an old lamp, while Nina curled up at the foot of the bed. Victoria has always considered herself a practical and rational person. From a young age, she cultivated a skeptical worldview, preferring to rely on science and logic to explain what most people would call the supernatural. To her, stories about ghosts and spirits were just that, stories. She grew up in a family that also valued critical thinking, and her life experiences only reinforced her belief that everything could be explained with careful investigation and a little common sense. When she moved into her old house, many of her neighbors shared with her stories about strange and inexplicable events that had occurred there. They talked about shadows that moved alone, whispers that echoed in the hallways, and a presence that seemed to watch everyone who entered. Victoria, however, listened to these stories with a polite smile, but inwardly dismissed them all as fruits of fertile imagination and superstition. Even when Nina started showing strange behavior, Victoria looked for rational explanations. Maybe there was some small animal that Nina was sniffing out, or maybe she was responding to sounds from outside the house. She considered the possibility that Nina was simply adjusting to a new environment and that her anxious behavior would disappear over time. Victoria began to investigate conventional methods to calm Nina. She consulted veterinarians, looked for tips in animal behavior books, and even tried some natural remedies to reduce her canine companion's anxiety. But despite all her efforts, the scratching on the door during the night did not stop. Increasingly, Nina seemed to see things that Victoria could not, and this began to shake her confidence in the rationality of situations. In a moment of frustration, Victoria talked to a friend who was a psychologist. He suggested that perhaps she was projecting her own anxieties onto the situation, that moving to a new house and adapting to a new lifestyle could be contributing to Nina's behavior and the way she was perceiving events. Victoria found the explanation plausible and committed herself to maintaining a calm and regular routine for both of them. But as the nights passed and the strange events became more frequent and intense, Victoria began to feel increasingly restless. Even in her determination to find logical explanations, the evidence before her was difficult to ignore. It was as if the house was trying to tell him something that went beyond his scientific understanding. Despite everything, Victoria clung to her skepticism. She refused to believe she was dealing with something supernatural. For her, admitting this would be giving up everything she believed in. Thus, she continued her search for rational answers, even when everything around her seemed to conspire against her convictions. She was determined to find a logical explanation for the events that disturbed her peace, not realizing that sometimes, the inexplicable simply cannot be ignored. Nina's habit of scratching her bedroom door in the middle of the night began almost imperceptibly. Initially, Victoria believed it was just common behavior, the result of a new routine or a simple desire for attention. During the first few nights, Victoria heard the soft sound of Nina's nails lightly scraping the wood. She got up, opened the door, and Nina entered the room, lying down next to the bed with a satisfied sigh. However, as time passed, the scratching began to become more insistent and desperate. Victoria noticed that Nina was not just asking to come in, but seemed to be trying to warn her about something. Sometimes, Nina would scratch at the door so intensely that the sound echoed throughout the house, waking Victoria from her deep sleep and making her heart race. Each time this happened, Victoria tried to calm Nina, but the dog seemed to be in a constant state of alert, her eyes fixed on the darkness of the hallway or the shadows that moved on the walls. Victoria began to feel a growing uneasiness, a feeling that something was wrong, something she couldn't see or understand. On one of these nights, after a particularly exhausting day, Victoria lay down in bed, hoping that Nina would finally sleep peacefully. But shortly after midnight, the scratching began again, louder and more frantic than ever. Victoria, already used to this disturbing routine, tried to ignore the sound, hoping that Nina would give up and go back to sleep. But Nina didn't stop. The sound of nails scraping against wood became louder and more insistent, as if the dog was trying to break through the door. Frustrated and exhausted, Victoria got up and called Nina to stop. To her astonishment, the sound did not stop. Confused, she threw a pillow toward the door, hoping to scare the dog into stopping. It was then that she heard a loud bark, but not from the door. The bark came from her side. Victoria looked and saw Nina lying next to her on the bed, watching the door with a fixed and scared look. Victoria felt a shiver run down her spine. If Nina was next to her, then what was scratching at the door? Slowly, she approached the door, her heart beating wildly. She opened it cautiously, hoping to find some logical explanation. But the hallway was empty, only the heavy silence of the house surrounded her. Nina, however, continued to observe something that Victoria couldn't see, her eyes fixed on a specific point beyond the door. Victoria tried to convince herself that this was all just a coincidence, that maybe she was hearing things or that Nina was reacting to some noise that she couldn't perceive. But, night after night, the scratching continued, always at the same time, always with the same desperate intensity. It was as if something or someone was trying to communicate with her, through Nina. Determined to understand what was happening, Victoria began to pay more attention to the details. She noticed that Nina only scratched the door at certain times of the night, always between midnight and 3 in the morning, the so-called dead hour, a period often associated with paranormal activity. Even so, Victoria refused to believe that she was dealing with anything supernatural. She was determined to find a rational explanation for Nina's behavior, but as the nights became more disturbing, that task seemed increasingly impossible. It was a cold winter night, and the house seemed quieter than ever. The wind whistled outside, making the windows tremble slightly. Victoria had spent the whole day working on a new project and was exhausted. After a simple dinner and a fireside reading session, she decided it was time for bed. Nina, as always, was by her side, following her into the bedroom and lying down on the rug next to the bed. Victoria turned off the lights and lay down, feeling comfortably warm under the covers. But she had barely closed her eyes when she heard the familiar and disturbing sound of Nina's nails scratching at the door. She sighed and got up, going to the door to open it and call the dog. However, when he opened the door, Nina was not outside. Confused, she looked back and saw that Nina was still lying on the carpet, looking at the door with an expression that mixed curiosity and fear. Intrigued and a little scared, Victoria closed the door and went back to bed. But the scratching started again almost immediately, this time more intense. It was as if someone or something was desperate to get into the room. Victoria felt a chill run down her spine and decided to investigate further. She grabbed a flashlight she kept on her bedside table and, with Nina beside her, opened the door again. The hallway was dark and silent. No sign of movement, nothing that could explain the scratches. Victoria shined her flashlight into every corner of the hallway, looking for any clues. But there was nothing. Feeling more uncomfortable, she returned to her room and closed the door firmly. She decided that she would not let fear take over her rational mind. Back in bed, she tried to calm down and sleep, but the scratching started again, incessant and disturbing. Every time the sound echoed, Nina stood up and faced the door, as if she was ready to protect her owner from something invisible. Victoria, already exasperated, threw a pillow against the door in hopes of scaring away whatever was causing the noise. It was at that moment that she heard Nina's loud, shrill bark, not from outside, but from her side, on the bed. Victoria's heart raced. She turned quickly and saw Nina beside her, her eyes glowing in the darkness, focused on the door. Victoria felt a primitive fear take over her. If Nina was with her the whole time, who or what was scratching at the door? With her heart in her throat, Victoria decided to face her fear. She picked up the flashlight again and opened the door with a sharp movement. The flashlight's light cut through the darkness of the corridor, revealing only emptiness. There was no sign of any intruder, human or animal. Victoria took a hesitant step out of the room, lighting up every corner of the hallway. The air felt colder, and the silence was almost deafening. Nina, now beside her, was growling softly, which only increased the feeling that something was terribly wrong. After a thorough and fruitless inspection, Victoria returned to her room, feeling defeated and confused. She closed the door again and sat on the bed, trying to understand what was happening. Nina remained restless, her eyes fixed on the door, as if she expected something to appear at any moment. Victoria, as much as she tried to maintain rationality, could not ignore the growing feeling that her home was harboring something beyond her understanding. That night was long and disturbing. Victoria remained awake, each scratch on the door making her heart skip a beat. Even when the sounds finally stopped, the uneasy feeling remained. Victoria knew something was wrong, something that defied his logic and her skepticism. And at dawn, with the first ray of sunlight coming through the window, she made a decision: she needed to find out what was happening, no matter how scary it was. Nina's behavior was a clear sign that something wasn't right, and Victoria could no longer ignore it. It was a cold winter night, and the house seemed quieter than ever. The wind whistled outside, making the windows tremble slightly. Victoria had spent the whole day working on a new project and was exhausted. After a simple dinner and a fireside reading session, she decided it was time for bed. Nina, as always, was by her side, following her into the bedroom and lying down on the rug next to the bed. Victoria turned off the lights and lay down, feeling comfortably warm under the covers. But she had barely closed her eyes when she heard the familiar and disturbing sound of Nina's nails scratching at the door. She sighed and got up, going to the door to open it and call the dog. However, when he opened the door, Nina was not outside. Confused, she looked back and saw that Nina was still lying on the carpet, looking at the door with an expression that mixed curiosity and fear. Intrigued and a little scared, Victoria closed the door and went back to bed. But the scratching started again almost immediately, this time more intense. It was as if someone or something was desperate to get into the room. Victoria felt a chill run down her spine and decided to investigate further. She grabbed a flashlight she kept on her bedside table and, with Nina beside her, opened the door again. The hallway was dark and silent. No sign of movement, nothing that could explain the scratches. Victoria shined her flashlight into every corner of the hallway, looking for any clues. But there was nothing. Feeling more uncomfortable, she returned to her room and closed the door firmly. She decided that she would not let fear take over her rational mind. Back in bed, she tried to calm down and sleep, but the scratching started again, incessant and disturbing. Every time the sound echoed, Nina stood up and faced the door, as if she was ready to protect her owner from something invisible. Victoria, already exasperated, threw a pillow against the door in hopes of scaring away whatever was causing the noise. It was at that moment that she heard Nina's loud, shrill bark, not from outside, but from her side, on the bed. Victoria's heart raced. She turned quickly and saw Nina beside her, her eyes glowing in the darkness, focused on the door. Victoria felt a primitive fear take over her. If Nina was with her the whole time, who or what was scratching at the door? With her heart in her throat, Victoria decided to face her fear. She picked up the flashlight again and opened the door with a sharp movement. The flashlight's light cut through the darkness of the corridor, revealing only emptiness. There was no sign of any intruder, human or animal. Victoria took a hesitant step out of the room, lighting up every corner of the hallway. The air felt holster, and the silence was almost deafening. Nina, now beside her, was growing softly, which only increased the feeling that something was terribly wrong. After a thorough and fruitless inspection, Victoria returned to her room, feeling defeated and confused. She closed the door again and sat on the bed, trying to understand what was happening. Nina remained restless, her eyes fixed on the door, as if she expected something to appear at any moment. Victoria, as much as she tried to maintain rationality, could not ignore the growing feeling that her home was harboring something beyond her understanding. That night was long and disturbing. Victoria remained awake, each scratch on the door making her heart skip a beat. Even when the sounds finally stopped, the uneasy feeling remained. Victoria knew something was wrong, something that defied her logic and her skepticism. And at dawn, with the first ray of sunlight coming through the window, she made a decision: she needed to find out what was happening, no matter how scary it was. Nina's behavior was a clear sign that something wasn't right, and Victoria could no longer ignore it. Victoria, perplexed, looked at Nina beside her on the bed, watching the door with attentive eyes. She felt a shiver run down her spine as realization gradually set in. If Nina was there, next to her, who was scratching at the door? Victoria's heart hammered in her chest as she tried to process this revelation. She couldn't ignore the persistent scratching, echoing in the empty hallway like an echo of something inexplicable. A wave of fear mixed with a hint of curiosity propelled her to investigate deeper, despite the discomfort she felt. Determined to find an explanation, Victoria took a deep breath and decided to confront the mystery head-on. She slowly got up from the bed, Nina following her with watchful eyes. With cautious steps, she approached the half-open door and cast a nervous glance into the shadowy hallway beyond. Victoria felt a mixture of shock and confusion settle inside her. She alternately looked at Nina next to her on the bed and at the scratched door in front of her. The feeling of being surrounded by something she couldn't understand was overwhelming. It was difficult to reconcile Nina's physical presence with the disturbing sounds coming from the door. A sudden chill ran down her spine as the truth began to form in her mind. She tried to search for a logical explanation, but all her attempts to rationalize the situation failed in the face of the palpable reality of Nina being by her side the entire time. Victoria wondered if she was going crazy or if something truly inexplicable was happening in her house. Her thoughts were spinning in circles as she tried to process what she had just discovered. The idea that something supernatural could be occurring defied all her rational convictions. With her heart still beating fast, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at Nina, who looked alert and tense. The dog emitted a slight growl, as if she was aware of something that escaped Victoria's human perception. Victoria's mind struggled to accept the inexplicable. She felt torn between the desire to find a rational explanation and the recognition that perhaps she was faced with something that could not be explained by conventional means. In this moment of perplexity, Victoria knew she needed to investigate further. The truth was there, in front of her, begging to be discovered, even if it meant confronting her own limits of understanding. Determined to unravel the mystery surrounding Nina and the strange events in her home, Victoria took a deep breath and decided that she would no longer run away from the truth that awaited her beyond that scratched door. Victoria remained there, on the edge of the bed, fighting her own thoughts and fears. Nina beside her seemed to be alert, as if she was noticing something that Victoria couldn't. The dog was emitting a light growl, which made Victoria wonder if perhaps there was something more to it than just the sound of scratching. As she stared at the door, an idea began to form in her mind, an idea she was reluctant to accept. Could there be a supernatural presence in her house? Something that couldn't be seen or touched, but that was there, leaving traces of its existence through the strange events that had been disturbing her tranquility. Victoria has always been skeptical about the supernatural, preferring to find logical explanations for everything that happened around her. However, faced with the inexplicable events she was now witnessing, she could no longer ignore the possibility that something beyond her understanding was at play. A shiver ran down her spine as she thought of the idea of an invisible presence, watching her, perhaps even interacting in ways she couldn't fully understand. Victoria's mind began to open to the possibility that maybe she wasn't alone in her house, that maybe there was something more out there, beyond the walls that surrounded her. With her heart still racing, she looked at Nina once again, seeking comfort in the presence of the dog who had always been her loyal companion. Nina looked back at her, her eyes expressing a mix of concern and determination, as if she were trying to convey something important to Victoria. It was in this moment of uncertainty and contemplation that Victoria decided she needed to explore further. She could no longer ignore the signs around her, the persistent scratches, Nina's agitated behavior. The truth was out there, waiting to be discovered, and Victoria knew she could no longer run away from it. With renewed determination, she got out of bed and decided that she would investigate every detail, every clue that could lead her closer to the truth about what was really happening in her home. The journey in search of answers began at that moment, and Victoria was ready to face the unknown, no matter how scary it was. Determined to uncover the truth behind the disturbing events in her home, Victoria decided to start investigating Nina's strange behavior. The dog had always been her faithful companion, and now she seemed to be acting in an unusual way, as if she noticed something that escaped human senses. Victoria picked up the flashlight again and approached Nina, who was standing next to the bed, staring at the bedroom door. The dog growled softly, the hairs on the back of her neck standing up in warning. It was clear that Nina was reacting to something that Victoria couldn't fully see or understand. Carefully, Victoria caressed Nina, trying to calm her while she observed her behavior. Nina moved restlessly, occasionally glancing at the door as if expecting something to appear at any moment. The dog seemed to be in a constant state of alert, as if she were protecting Victoria from an invisible threat. While continuing to observe Nina, Victoria thought about possible explanations for the dog's behavior. Was it just a case of inexplicable nervousness, or could there be something more sinister at play? The idea of a supernatural presence still lingered in her mind, even though her skeptical nature resisted accepting it completely. Determined to find answers, Victoria planned to observe Nina more closely over the next few nights. She set up a discreet security camera in the hallway, focused on the bedroom door, hoping to capture anything that could explain the inexplicable events. As time passed, Victoria committed herself to carefully documenting each strange incident, making detailed notes of times, Nina's behaviors, and any other relevant details. She knew that this investigation was crucial to her sanity and safety, as well as being the key to unraveling the mystery that haunted her home. As Victoria continued her investigation, she found herself increasingly intrigued by the possibility of supernatural events in her home. During her research, she discovered old accounts of the property where she lived, echoing stories from longtime residents and rumors in the local community. Some neighbors mentioned unexplained incidents that happened at the house decades ago. Stories of shadows that moved through the corridors at night, children's laughter echoing without an apparent source, and doors that opened and closed on their own were just some of the stories that Victoria found. She rummaged through old files at the local library, finding yellowed newspaper articles that reported strange and unexplained events associated with the estate. The stories ranged from reports of ghostly apparitions to poltergeist incidents, further fueling Victoria's growing suspicion that something supernatural might be at play. As she absorbed these disturbing stories, Victoria wondered how they related to recent events in her home. Could it be possible that the phenomena she observed in Nina's unusual behavior were connected to a dark past that haunted the property? These discoveries only increased Victoria's determination to unravel the mystery. She intensified her investigative efforts, talking to older neighbors and seeking more detailed historical records. Each new piece of information brought her a little closer to the truth hidden behind the walls of her home. As she continued her search for answers, Victoria became increasingly aware that she was not alone in her journey. The house's past was full of mysteries and secrets that now seemed to want to emerge, challenging her rational understanding and demanding that she confront the unknown with courage and determination. In the days following the discovery of past stories about the house, Victoria observed that Nina's behavior intensified. Not only did the dog continue to growl and become restless near the bedroom door, but she also began exhibiting strange new behaviors. Sometimes during the night, Victoria would wake up to Nina barking furiously at a dark corner of the room, where nothing seemed to be present to human eyes. Nina followed something invisible with her eyes, her posture tense as if she were following the movement of a figure that only she could see. Victoria got goosebumps when she witnessed these episodes. She tried to calm Nina, calling her name and petting her gently, but the dog seemed mesmerized by whatever she was there for. It was as if Nina was in tune with something beyond human understanding, something that transcended the reality that Victoria knew. These moments only reinforced Victoria's conviction that there was something deeply disturbing happening in her home. She found herself confronting her beliefs about the supernatural once again, forced to reconsider her certainties as she witnessed Nina's inexplicable behavior. Determined to understand what was happening, Victoria expanded her investigations. She began recording each incident involving Nina, making detailed notes about the dog's times, locations, and behaviors. She installed additional security cameras in the house, hoping to capture visual evidence of whatever was affecting Nina. As the mystery deepened, Victoria felt she was entering unknown territory. She knew she needed to move on, not only for her own sanity, but also to protect Nina and understand the truth that seemed increasingly elusive and frightening. As Victoria continued her investigation, the supernatural events in her home seemed to intensify. She began to notice increasingly disturbing phenomena, such as objects that inexplicably moved from place to place and sounds that echoed through the hallways without an apparent source. On a quiet afternoon, Victoria was in the living room when she saw a chair move slowly, dragging a few centimeters with no one around. She stood frozen, her eyes fixed on the chair that seemed to have a life of its own. It was hard to deny the evidence before her eyes. Something beyond her understanding was influencing the objects in her home. In addition to the inexplicable movements, Victoria also began to hear strange sounds during the night. Noises that could not be attributed to any natural event, such as indistinct whispers or soft knocks on the walls. These sounds added a layer of fear and mystery to the already charged atmosphere of her home. Nina, in turn, continued to react intensely to supernatural events. The dog now not only barked into the void, but also seemed to follow something invisible with her eyes, as if she were witnessing something that escaped human perception. Victoria was perplexed and frightened by the increase in these events. She tried to find rational explanations, but the accumulated evidence made it increasingly difficult to ignore the possibility of a supernatural presence in her home. Determined to unravel the mystery, Victoria continued to carefully document each incident, keeping detailed records and trying to find patterns in the supernatural events. She knew she needed to find answers before the situation escalated even further, and she found herself completely at the mercy of the stranger who seemed to inhabit her home. With the increase in supernatural events, Victoria could no longer ignore the growing feeling that her home was being haunted. The objects moving on their own, the unexplained sounds, and Nina's strange behavior were enough evidence for her to reconsider her beliefs about the supernatural. She found herself thinking about the historical accounts of the property, the stories of inexplicable events that seemed to echo through the walls of her home. Each new incident reinforced his conviction that something beyond understanding was happening here, something that could not be explained by logic or reason. Victoria began to feel a heavy, oppressive presence whenever she was at home, as if she were being watched by invisible eyes. In the silence of the night, the distant whispers and indistinct sounds made her shudder, as Nina continued to react in ways that seemed to confirm her suspicions. She found herself surrounded by an atmosphere of mystery and fear, where every shadow in the dark corners could hide something beyond human understanding. The rationality she had always cherished was being challenged by the inexplicable events that now dominated her life. Determined to find answers and restore peace to her home, Victoria intensified her efforts to investigate the nature of the supernatural presence that seemed to haunt her home. She consulted experts, sought protective methods, and continued to document every detail of the events she witnessed. As the journey to unravel the mystery became more intense, Victoria knew she was entering unknown and dangerous territory. However, she could no longer ignore the truth that seemed to cry out to be discovered, even if it meant confronting the unexplored with courage and determination. As supernatural events continued to haunt Victoria's home, she noticed that Nina was not only reacting intensely, but seemed to be completely aware of something that escaped Victoria's awareness. The dog continued to demonstrate peculiar behaviors, such as stopping suddenly and staring at an empty spot in the air, followed by low growls and, sometimes, agitated barks. Victoria was perplexed when she witnessed these moments. She tried to follow Nina's gaze, but she couldn't make out anything but empty space. It was as if the dog was interacting with an invisible presence, something that only she could clearly feel or see. These observations left Victoria even more convinced that something genuinely supernatural was occurring in her home. She began to consider the possibility that Nina not only sensed the presence, but was perhaps in tune with it in a way that humans could not fully understand. With each new manifestation of paranormal activity, Victoria felt the tension increase. She knew that she needed to find a way to protect herself and Nina while continuing to investigate the exact nature of the entity that seemed to be affecting their lives. Determined to obtain definitive answers, Victoria expanded her investigative measures. She installed more security cameras at strategic points around the house, hoping to capture visual evidence that could explain what was happening. Additionally, she sought guidance from experts in paranormal phenomena, trying to better understand how to deal with the situation. After weeks of inexplicable events and the intensification of supernatural phenomena in her home, Victoria finally felt that she could no longer postpone a direct confrontation with the entity that seemed to haunt her. She was determined to seek definitive answers, no matter how scary or unknown it might be. Determined to face the supernatural presence head-on, Victoria prepared herself mentally. She chose a night when events seemed most active, when strange sounds echoed through the halls and the sense of an unseen presence was most palpable. Armed with a flashlight, Victoria cautiously entered the dark spaces of her home, following the noises that seemed to guide her to wherever the entity was most present. She felt her heart quicken with each step, her mind prepared for what she might encounter. Nina, who followed her like a silent shadow, also seemed to be alert, occasionally stopping to sniff the air and carefully observe Victoria's every move. The dog didn't make a single sound, but her behavior indicated that she was also aware of the tension in the environment. In a moment of tense calm, Victoria arrived at the central point of the supernatural events, the dark corridor where objects had moved on their own and where whispers seemed to find echoes. She stopped, taking a deep breath to gather her courage before turning on the flashlight and illuminating the space in front of her. It was then that she saw it. In the corner of the corridor, an indistinct shadow began to slowly form, taking a shape that seemed to defy logic. It was an ethereal, vaguely human presence that seemed to pulse with an energy that Victoria could not describe. Heart beating strong, Victoria faced the entity firmly. She didn't know if she was facing a spirit, a residual manifestation of the past, or something else entirely. But she knew she had to confront the unknown to understand and solve the mystery that affected her and Nina's lives. With determination, Victoria began to ask questions out loud, challenging the entity to speak out or respond. She sought answers, sought to understand why that presence was there, what she wanted and how she could find a resolution to the disturbing events that had haunted her home. In the silence that followed, Victoria felt a mixture of fear and expectation. She knew she was in unfamiliar territory, but she was determined to remain strong until she got the answers she sought. With the supernatural presence before her, Victoria felt a mix of determination and growing concern. As she confronted the entity, her protective instinct towards Nina intensified. The dog, who remained beside her, seemed restless and alert, capturing every movement and vibration in the air with a sensitivity that transcended human understanding. Even facing the unknown, Victoria did not hesitate to act to protect herself and her faithful companion. She strategically positioned herself between Nina and the entity, maintaining a determined countenance as she sought to better understand the intentions of the supernatural presence. With the flashlight in hand, she alternated between illuminating the pulsing shadow and observing Nina's reaction. The dog growled softly, its eyes fixed on the entity as if it was ready to defend its owner at any cost. Victoria began reciting words of protection that she had learned in her research into supernatural phenomena. She sought to create a barrier of positive energy around herself and Nina, hoping that this would ward off or weaken the entity surrounding them. Meanwhile, the inexplicable sounds continued to echo around them, like distant murmurs in a language Victoria didn't recognize. Every moment was tense and charged with an energy that seemed to want to manifest itself in some way. Nina, in turn, remained at Victoria's side, her presence comforting amid the supernatural chaos. The dog did not back down, even in the face of the imposing, mysterious presence they faced together. As Victoria faced the supernatural entity with determination, a glimmer of understanding began to emerge. She felt a connection between the supernatural events and the past stories about the house. The pulsing presence in front of her began to take shape, revealing traces of a human figure, ethereal and vaguely familiar. As the entity manifested itself more clearly, Victoria felt a wave of recognition. It was as if she was facing a former resident of the house, a disturbed spirit who was searching for something unresolved or who still maintained ties to the place she once called home. The presence seemed to convey a sense of sadness and restlessness, as if she were trapped between two worlds, unable to find peace. The murmurs that echoed in the air took on a lamenting tone, a melody of pain that resonated with the stories of past tragedies that Victoria had discovered. Understanding the nature of the entity better, Victoria felt her determination mix with compassion. She realized that she was not only dealing with a supernatural force, but also with a soul searching for resolution and liberation. In an act of courage and empathy, Victoria began talking to the entity, offering words of comfort and understanding. She shared her discoveries about the house's history, showing that she was aware of the circumstances that could have led to the spirit's anguish. As the dialogue unfolded, the atmosphere around them seemed to change. The sounds of murmurs gradually subsided, replaced by a calm, expectant silence. The entity's presence began to slowly dissipate, as if it was finding the peace it sought. At the end of the night, Victoria felt a sense of relief mixed with admiration for the experience she had just experienced. She knew that the journey to unravel the mystery was not yet completely over, but she felt grateful that she had found a way to calm her troubled spirit and protect herself and Nina. As dawn broke, the house seemed more peaceful than ever. Victoria knew there was still much to learn about the secrets that surrounded her, but she was determined to face the future with renewed courage and understanding. After the revelation of the true nature of the entity and Victoria's empathetic dialogue, she decided to seek help from a specialist in paranormal phenomena. Based on her findings and the guidance she received, she decided to perform a spiritual cleansing ritual in the house. With the help of a medium respected in the local community, Victoria conducted a careful ritual to purify the space and facilitate the spirit's passage to the other side. During the ritual, the entity's presence was gradually calmed, and Victoria felt a sense of peace and resolution in the environment. At the end of the ritual, the house felt lighter and more welcoming, as if a heavy load had been lifted. Nina, in turn, seemed calmer and more relaxed, as if she too felt the change in the environment. Victoria continued to monitor the situation over the next few days, watching closely for any signs of paranormal activity returning. However, the peace and tranquility persisted, and she could finally breathe a sigh of relief, knowing that she had faced and solved the mystery that haunted her home. Over time, Victoria and Nina resumed their daily routine with a new sense of security and serenity, remaining vigilant but confident that they had found the peace they had been searching for. After the purification ritual and the resolution of the conflict with the disturbed spirit, Victoria and Nina experienced significant changes in their lives. The house, now free from paranormal activity, became a peaceful haven again, where Victoria felt safe and protected. For Victoria, the supernatural event served as a spiritual awakening. She began to value her intuition and sensitivity more to perceive signs from the spiritual world around her. Furthermore, the incident strengthened her bond with Nina, creating an even deeper connection between them after facing the supernatural challenge together. Nina, on the other hand, seemed more serene and calm since the purification ritual. The dog, who previously demonstrated strange behaviors, now seemed more relaxed and happy, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Together, Victoria and Nina continued their lives with a new perspective on the supernatural and a greater understanding of the importance of taking care of the energy in their space. They remained vigilant, but also found peace in the knowledge that they had overcome a significant challenge together and emerged stronger because of it. The experience also left a mark on Victoria, inspiring her to learn more about paranormal phenomena and help others facing similar situations. She began sharing her story with the local community, offering support and guidance to those seeking understanding and resolution in the face of the unknown. Thus, the supernatural event not only transformed Victoria and Nina's lives, but also enabled them to embrace the mystery of the spiritual world with renewed courage, understanding, and empathy. After everything she had been through, Victoria took some time to reflect deeply on the experience that changed her life. Sitting on her comfortable couch, with Nina at her feet, she stared at the crackling fire in the fireplace, lost in thoughts about what she had faced. For Victoria, the encounter with the supernatural was not only a disturbing event, but also a journey of self-discovery. She realized that often what we don't immediately understand as a human can have deeper and more complex explanations in the spiritual realm. The experience led her to question her own beliefs and open her mind to possibilities beyond what is tangible and scientifically explainable. She learned to respect the invisible forces that can influence our lives in ways we don't yet fully understand. Additionally, the journey strengthened her faith in the importance of maintaining a spiritual and energetic balance in her home and personal life. Victoria began to value Nina's intuition even more and recognized her own ability to perceive and respond to subtle signs from the spiritual world. At the same time, the experience left her with a renewed humility in the face of the unknown. She realized that, even with all the knowledge and preparation, there are aspects of the supernatural that can escape human understanding. This encouraged her to continue learning and exploring, always with respect and caution towards what cannot be fully understood. Finally, Victoria felt gratitude for the opportunity for personal and spiritual growth that the experience provided. She knew the journey didn't end there, but she was confident that she had the inner resources and acquired wisdom to face any future challenge that might come her way. So, as the night wore on and the fire gently crackled, Victoria felt a sense of inner peace and acceptance toward the supernatural, knowing that every experience, no matter how frightening it may initially seem, can be an opportunity for deeper growth and understanding. As I close this journey of mystery and self-discovery, I invite you to reflect on your own experiences with the supernatural. Share in the comments below if you have experienced something similar and how it impacted your view of the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more intriguing stories like this and activate the bell to receive notifications of new videos. Together, we can explore the mysteries that surround us with courage and curiosity. Until next time, and may your journey always be guided by the light of understanding and wisdom.